That's it. Well, let's go get to shorting. And Fintel has identified the most shorted companies on the ASX, and the rankings might surprise you. For the numbers and the guilty parties, Wilton Risenhoover of Fintel joins us now via Skype. Wilton, thanks for joining us in the program. The short squeeze opportunities. Tell us how this model works to begin with, and then we'll get to the names that are on the list at the moment.
Sure. We looked at a number of factors that seem to precede short squeezes, and we built a model that basically takes those factors and builds them into a single ranking relative to their peers. And so some of the factors are things like the short interest percentage of float. We don't look at just the raw short interest, we look at the total capitalization that is being shorted. We look at the change in the short interest over the last month. And we also look at the pricing. So if you have a company where the share price is climbing rapidly, that is required for a short squeeze. And the final factor that we look at is really the cost to borrow shares. Whenever you short a stock, you have to borrow the shares, and that's a loan. And when you find companies that have a very high borrow rate, then you find that those tend to squeeze more frequently than companies that have a low borrow rate. And we roll all that into a ranking. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, and again, before we get to the juicy guilty parties, what's the advantage in knowing these names for investors?
Well, short interest is an indicator of sentiment, for example. And most people that are shorting companies are typically institutions that have high research budgets, and they tend to be smart money. And so when you think about the kinds of companies that are being shorted, these are companies where smart money believes that there's something wrong with them or that they might decline. And so it's really a measure of sentiment, of overall sentiment.
All right, Wilton, let's get to the names. Who are the most vulnerable names on the local market which are vulnerable to a short squeeze?
So we have the top 5 on our list right now. The number 1 is Omni Bridgeway, OBL. I noticed that you guys had that on the screen a little bit earlier. We also have Nickel Mines Limited as number 2. FMG Fortescue Metals Group is number 3. EML Payments is number 4. And Mineral Resources is number 5. These are the top 5 most shorted stocks that we have on the ASX at this time.
So when you're looking
What's interesting is...
Sorry, I was just saying, looking at the scale, you say 100 most likely, and these are all bumping up against 100. So there's no ambiguity about it.
These are all relative to each other, right? So this is the number 1, the 96.8. This is it's higher than the 96th percentile for all of the peers on the ASX.
How do you use the data? So you go and produce this report, you've got the modeled outcomes. How do you go and use it beyond that? Is it something publicly available as a subscription service? Do you go and actively trade around the results?
Sure. So there's a subscription service that we offer, okay, and we also offer some free data as well regarding the short interest. The way you look at this is, especially for the ones that are at the top of the list, you're going to expect some type of volatility in terms of the price. Typically in a short squeeze, you see the price going up significantly, as we saw with GameStop last year. But the contra of that is that the price might drop precipitously once, whatever action is taking place is going to kind of fade out. And so what we do is we look at these top list here, and we expect that there's going to be some type of volatility, either up or down, in the near-term future.
Really interesting. So when it comes to the information, other markets out there as well. So I'm just trying to go and think where you could go and apply what you've got for this market. Are you looking to other markets as well? Because clearly there's short selling around the world.
Sure. We actually cover short squeeze, short interest for most major markets, especially the US, Canada, Australia, the UK, Hong Kong, Japan, and so forth. And we also look at kind of macro indicators as well. What's interesting is that you can actually look at the short interest of tracking ETFs. So, for example, you could look at EWA, which is the MSCI Australia ETF, and look at the short interest and kind of fund flows into that ETF to try to figure out what U.S. markets at least believe is going to happen to that ETF, and as a proxy, what they believe might be the future of the Australian markets as well. And so we also look at these macro indicators for all major countries as well.
Interesting. Look, to finish off, one thing we know across the globe over the last few years that we're seeing short interest has actually gone down substantially in aggregate terms for a lot of these markets. Has that gone and changed the way that the modelled outcomes arrive?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but I think what we're looking at here is specific instances of short squeezes and short interest. When we're looking at the the stocks themselves. And what you're finding is that in some cases you're seeing industries with more short interest and some stocks that have less short interest.